Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. How do you deal with the people and circumstances that challenge you? What tools do you use to be kind to those around you without ever losing your sense of self? Graciousness is practicing the arts of kindness, thoughtfulness, good manners, humanity, and basic decency. A quality of graciousness will improve your life and make the world a better place. It's not about memorizing every rule of traditional etiquette or spending all your time maintaining a spotless house. Graciousness is ultimately about approaching the world with compassion, conviction, self-confidence, and wholeheartedness. Or so writes our guest on Pathways today. Our guest is Kelly Williams Brown, author of the new book, Gracious, a practical primer on charm, tact, and unsinkable strength. Kelly is the founder of the popular site adultingblog.com and is the New York Times bestselling author of the book Adulting. Previously, she was a features reporter and an award-winning humor columnist for the Statesman Journal, a daily newspaper in Salem, Oregon, where she lives. Hello, Kelly, and welcome to the Pathways program.
Well, hello, Paul. Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Now, since cultural evolution is the theme of our show, in general, how do you feel that your work supports cultural evolution?
Wow. Start off with an easy one, huh? I would say, and not to sound schmaltzy, but, that whole sort of be the change you want to see in the world. When I look out, I see so many good and wonderful things about this world of ours, but I also see people finding it very easy to be rude and unkind to each other. I mean, I don't think you have to look any further than maybe current inhabitants of the White House to see that we're living in a pretty coarse time. And it's not just that, it's that we're constantly being pulled away from our actual life by these little screens that beep and boop at us and tell us such important things, or so we think, more important than the human in front of us. And I would argue that by slowing down and recognizing the humanity of everyone around you, you will find your life changed.
I want to ask about the positioning of the book and who your intended audience is. Is this book just for millennials? Is it just for women?
Whenever I write, I have only ever been a woman and only ever been a millennial. I mean, that's my experience on this planet. So I certainly write from that perspective. I like to think that this book goes a little bit beyond that. I think that because, and I want to be clear, these ideas are not mine. I treated this as a reporting project. I went and found women and men who embody that gracious quality. And an alternate title for this book, which I would not have used because this would not be very gracious, would be Rad Old Ladies Tell You What's Up. There's many wonderful 70, 80, and 90-somethings in this book. And because of that, I think it's something that really people of all ages can enjoy. I think we think a lot in terms of, our career growth. 10 years into a career, you're better than at year one. Well, I think of that in terms of life experience too, and these people have 50, 60, 70, 80 years of being a successful human being under their belt, and I wanted to hear what they had to say.
Not only do you leverage the voices of your elders, but you leverage the voices out of the 19th century, and I thought that was really interesting. Please explain what I mean.
Absolutely. So one thing that I did not realize was how very many etiquette manuals from the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 90s would be available online. And as I went through them, I was so surprised because some things really seem like, aside from some of the language, they could have been written yesterday about text messages between my friends and I. And so in some ways I think, oh wow, this is really universal. And then you would get to a statement that was like, when, being waited upon by slaves. And I would think, oh my God, good God in heaven, Miss Leslie, come on. And, so that was a bit of a, wow, I'm glad things have changed. But I really did in those books find a lot of things that are still relevant today and some truly ridiculous things.
One of the quotes that comes from one of these old manuals that's in the book, speaks to how good manners is not just the province of the elites. The quote goes, "Best society is not a fellowship of the wealthy. It is an association of gentle folk, of which good form and speech, charm of manner, knowledge of the social amenities, and instinctive consideration for the feelings of others are the credentials."
Absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, that's Emily Post in the first edition. And she is actually the great-grandmother of my friend Lizzie Post, who is carrying the mantle today. And, Lizzie and her cousin Danielle Post-Sending have a great podcast called Awesome Etiquette. And what I love about their exploration is people think of Emily Post as this really buttoned up, sort of traditional institution. And yet they always go back to good manners is about kindness, respect, compassion, and honesty. And it always comes from those places. And, a good example of this is, and this may well be an apocryphal tale, but a well-known etiquette legend has it that Queen Victoria was having a dinner, and one of the attendees at the dinner was from a different country. And at one point, this gentleman picked up his finger bowls, which are used for sort of washing the fingers. It's water with a little bit of rose water in there and oils and such, and drank it. And then the other guests were snickering at him for, being such a bore and having no idea what a finger bowl is. At which point Queen Victoria picked up her finger bowl and drank the entire thing. Because the truth of the matter is that while that guest may have made a slight faux pas in not knowing, that custom, the real rudeness was happening at those who were laughing and thinking that they were better than him. And so Queen Victoria, as the highest ranking person, sort of gave everyone their comeuppance by pointing out that it's really about kindness. And the small details are around an architecturally sound whole.
That's a great story. Now, one might imagine that your current book is a follow-up to your first book, Adulting, How to Become a Grown-Up in 468 Easy-ish Steps. Is that true?
Absolutely. It definitely grew out of that. They're similar in that I reported both of them, and they're also similar in that they're both things that, when I wrote them, they were things in my life that I was trying to pursue and attain and grow in. I think of adulting as sort of the basic, let's get your life in order. And it's okay if you feel like a mess, and it's okay if you're 22 and fresh out of school and have no idea what to do and are running out of toilet paper. So let's kind of begin to fix that. And then I would think of Gracious as sort of advanced adulting. Now that you've gotten your own life in order and sort of have mastered those little skills to help keep you afloat, how do we take that out into the world? And how do we interact with the humans around us? Because at the end of the day, as far as I can tell, that is our record and our legacy, is what we do and say to the humans around us. I'm sure everyone has a rich inner life, but things that you think don't necessarily play out in the world, but your words and your actions always do.
How did millennials take to your first book? I mean, do they have an appetite for thinking of themselves as adults?
I think part of the reason that adulting was so successful is that nobody really thinks of themselves as an adult. People think of, I don't know even what the idea of an adult is, but I guess, we have this sort of Ubermensch or Uber lady whose home is always perfectly clean, who is prompt and on time with every single thing in their life, who never misspeaks or makes a mistake, who is financially independent and makes perfect decisions. And I would interview people for the first book, and they would say, well, I'm sure you don't want to interview me. I'm not a real adult. And I would think, well, you're a surgeon. If you're not a real adult, who is a real adult? And so the point that I'm making is that growing up is always hard. It's hard to find your way in the world. It's hard to accept that there are lots of things that are outside of your control. Let's look at the things that are inside our control and work on those.
Is that your definition of being an adult?
I think being an adult is pretty simple at its heart. Aside from the legal definitions of adulthood, to me, to be a grown-up is to be someone who is kind and decent to other people and to themselves, who ascertains the things that need to be done, and then does them with minimal fuss, self-pity, or self-congratulation.
That is a great definition. Is there any difference between graciousness, which is what your current book is about, and manners?
You know, there's a subtle difference. I think manners are absolutely a part of graciousness, but to delve down a little bit, if you look at grace as a sort of religious or linguistic construct, and it is wide. It is in lots of languages, and it is a very old word. But one of the things I came to again and again was grace means unearned favor. And the idea is all of us enjoying the unearned favor of God or gods or the universe or however, that we are beloved and we are cared for, and we didn't do anything to earn that. We just get that.
And we're lucky that we have a chance.
Exactly. And to me, graciousness is to give unearned favor to humanity, to just make that your starting point. And within many traditions, including, Judeo-Christian, the idea is that when you do that, you are reflecting the light of God in a small way onto those around you.
Okay. And why has it been generally considered as a feminine virtue?
It's interesting. It's masculine and feminine in different languages, so I don't want to make any real blanket statements. But, we do see the Karaites in ancient Greece, who were the three graces, and their names, depending on who you ask, translate to joy, beauty, and bloom. And I really love that it is a word that most of the time is feminine, but it also has that component of the divine to it, which a lot of times masculine words tend to be the divine ones, and feminine words tend to be, soil, pot, root vegetable. These slightly less exciting things, vessel for something more important,
Right.
Whereas this is a word that you see again and again, and it's ascribed to be a feminine quality.
Right. I think that's beautiful. What you're saying is as a reflection on patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And so, do you think that women have more of a capacity for graciousness? When we think of Southern charm, we don't think of, I suppose we could think of the Southern gentleman, but usually we think in terms of a female.
Well, and before I begin, I must give credit. I would be remiss here not to mention, the beautiful manners of many of my male friends, particularly in New Orleans, and maybe we'll have a sidebar conversation about some of the ways that manifests itself, that graciousness. But, I think that a lot of graciousness is really being very aware of the humans and their humanity around you. And it is not an ego thing. It is not about you. And it's not about me, it's not about you, it's sort of about us. It's about that connection, no matter whether that connection lasts for 2 minutes as I check out at the 7-Eleven, or that connection lasts for 50 years because you're my partner. And in that way, I think, you think about hard power versus soft power. And hard power is kind of this militaristic might. You're going to do what we say because there's consequences if you don't. Whereas soft power is more of a collaborative and communal, what is the best outcome for everyone in this situation, and how can we get to that place? And soft power relies on relationships, it relies on communication, it relies on being aware of not only the present context, but the past, maybe even historical context. And I think soft power and graciousness really go together.
That's very interesting. You say in the book the heart of graciousness is compassion, which is certainly a soft power. And the other expression you use is radical hospitality, which you define as the acceptance of whatever is happening, thoughts, feelings, sensations, behaviors, whatever is around us, without resisting it.
Yes, exactly. And that is actually one of my theories of grace. Throughout the book, I talked to all sorts of people, but several spiritual leaders. And I'm blanking on his name, but he's a wonderful, wonderful rabbi. And basically the idea of radical hospitality is akin to sort of Zen Buddhism, where it's the world exists precisely as it is. It cannot be any other way. And when I can sit with sort of benign equanimity to whatever is happening to me and to whatever the people around me are doing, maybe I like it, maybe I don't, so what? the only thing that I control in that moment is my own reaction to that, and examining what I am putting out into the universe, rather than spending a lot of time being critical or judgmental of others or existence itself.
I like the way that the book has got a how-to element and reinforces the idea that graciousness is a trait or a virtue that we can cultivate. And you say in the book, good manners encompass sincere compassion, kindness, and respect, not as something to be doled out when you feel like it or want to impress someone, but as your baseline. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a spiritual practice. I think this is a very spiritual book, even though it doesn't purport to be that. I found a lot of benefit in that respect.
Well, thank you so much. That is wonderful to hear. I am a spiritual person myself, and I didn't set out to write a spiritual book, but I believe that grace is in some ways a slightly otherworldly, elevated concept. And to reflect that back in the book, I didn't shy away from it, because to shy away from how the gracious folk in here, how their spirituality influences who they are, would be unfair to them. And so I really do think that for me, practicing graciousness, turning my attention away from my own internal icky monologues of judgment and likes and dislikes and why isn't this like this and this would be a little bit better if it was XYZ, and to sort of just pay attention and take in the world around me, for me, that's the solution I found.
Well, that kind of cosmic consciousness, or that consideration of the collective, is a very spiritual idea. And as you say in your introduction, the world remains indifferent to us, yet we take it so personally. There's so much ego in that. And this existential dissonance is reinforced constantly as we move through life indifferent to the humans around us. Mm-hmm. So that is an interesting awareness point that a lot of people have a hard time with.
Well, I think the idea of attention and being seen, I think that's a deep human need. We're social animals, and we just want to know we exist. And yet we're so invested in others knowing we exist, and how much time do we spend letting others know that we see them and we know they exist? And even really simple things, in the book, at one point, I have interviewed my friend Nora, who talks about saying, everybody knows to say please and thank you, but I really like to say hello and goodbye. That simple act of seeing someone saying, hello, how are you? How's your day been? Or it's so nice to see you again, so-and-so. And then when you're leaving their presence, to say that it's been really wonderful to meet them, or that you're glad to have seen them again. It just sort of bookends any interaction you have between there with that little bit of extra, that little bit of I see you. You're a real human. You are not some sort of, I don't even know what we imagine, but, artificial intelligence who is behind, the checkout at this Safeway, who is programmed to do nothing but, shoot a laser at our purchases and then accept our payment.
As quickly as possible.
As quickly as possible. We treat other humans as though they are sort of logistical obstacles.
Or robots.
Between us and what we want. And the truth is that is not the case. Every human you see is just as human as you.
So do you think that lack of manners is part of the cause of the pervasive loneliness that you referred to in the book?
I think so. And I think, I am a child of the internet. I love the internet. I think it is really astonishing in a man on the moon that I carry around a little tiny thing with me that can tell me literally anything about the collective knowledge of humanity. I mean, that is astonishing and it's wonderful. And there's a lot of people, including, people who are very close to me, family members and friends, who really have used the internet to find their people, find their tribe, and that's important too. But it can be very alienating. It can really take us away from sort of the mundane, sometimes boring, sometimes exciting living and interaction with the humans around us. And I think, to me, as wonderful as the internet is, it's not a substitute for actual quality time and good conversation and being with friends and doing something as simple and ancient as, breaking bread together.
Yeah, I love the way that you go into some detail in the book about how the social media brings up a lot of issues of online graciousness. I mean, one of the venues where we see the most ungracious activity is on the internet, and
Absolutely.
how people can, from behind some anonymous mask or from some distance, just be incredibly unkind. And you spent a lot of, there's a good section of the book talking about that, and I want to read part of it that has relevance to texting, because I love what you say here. Realistic expectation setting, and this is with regard to what kind of responsiveness you can expect in a texting conversation, is the perfect prophylactic against hurt feelings and misunderstanding. The friends who treat their phones as optional and get back to messages when the time is right for them, they somehow are never dead in my mind because they have never given me the impression that their top priority is to respond to run-of-the-mill texts in record time. They might, but I don't expect it. Incidentally, it tends to be these friends that I have the most solid and rewarding time with in person, perhaps because they are not constantly checking their phones when we're together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I just don't think we as humans are maybe designed or programmed, and who knows, maybe we're evolving to be this, but I don't feel capable of conducting 70 simultaneous conversations. And when you add up all the emails you get, all the text messages you get, Facebook Messenger, Twitter, this, that, the other thing, we're not having very many substantive conversations. And so for me, just taking a step back and saying, I absolutely love you. If it's anything urgent, please call me, but I'm trying to spend less time on my phone day to day. And then people will know, and they won't think, oh my God, she's trapped in a well. Where's Kelly? And one of my friends in that same chapter, Alex, who had become quite the Twitter personality and had a gajillion followers and was, into it and everything. And for a while, and at one point, I guess, in this, she sort of stepped back and did a calculation. And it was, she calculated out, the amount of time she spent per tweet in terms of composing it.
I love this story.
Getting it right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, you know where this is going. Getting it right, and then posting it, and then replying to comments on it. And she realized that if she kept up at her current rate, she was going to spend 9 years of her life solely composing and responding to tweets. That's how
9 years of her remaining life.
Right, exactly. And she, when she realized that, she really thought, wow, that is too much time. And it's not to say, there might be some people out there for whom that's entirely appropriate. But she said when she looks back on her, sort of life work, that's not what she wants it to be. And so she quit Twitter, and she continues to exist, and she quit Facebook, and she continues to exist, miraculously enough. She has yet to evaporate in a puff of smoke. And what I love about Alex is that she always says that, she might not see her friends all the time because she's very busy. But when she does see them, she makes it a really wonderful, high-quality time. So I know I'm only going to see Alex a couple times a year, but when we do, we're going to get together for a fabulous meal. We're really going to have that time together.
Now, in your book, you outline some of the payoffs of being kind and gracious, and you state you should want to be gracious for virtuous and noble reasons, and I'm sure you do. However, it certainly doesn't hurt that there are many, let's say, tangible and immediate payoffs. Let's talk about that. What are some of the payoffs?
Absolutely. And like I said, you should, it's, in my Zen books, I'm always being reminded that, I'm not to seek enlightenment, because seeking enlightenment is the opposite of enlightenment, because that's attachment and blah, blah, blah. However, between now and gracious enlightenment, shall we say, I would say that to sort of create a gracious atmosphere around yourself allows you, one, you can just get away with murder. You really can. And I know I'm not actual murder, of course, that's very ungracious, but being kind to people, paying attention to people, really being sympathetic and not screaming at that person behind the gate, at Alaska Airlines, because they're not the ones who are causing this delay. you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. You really, really do. And beyond that, people are just more inclined to do things for you. But I think the most important and most immediate payoff, for me at least, is that when I am behaving in that way, I feel much happier because I'm not thinking about myself nonstop. And thinking about myself has really almost never borne any fruit, and yet I keep going back to it again and again. Whereas if I'm acting in a gracious way and I'm thinking about those around me, well, actually, I'll quote Nora again here. One of the most wonderful things that she said is that she's always thinking about others. And I said, well, Nora, let me play devil's advocate. What about those of us who like to think about ourselves? And she kind of laughed. And she said, well, I guess I would say this. Think about how many people you know. Hundreds, thousands. Don't you think a life spent thinking about hundreds or thousands of other people would be more interesting than a life spent thinking about just one?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I wish we had a lot more time because there's so many parts of this book that I could read that are hilarious, and I'm not sure that we're bringing out how funny this book is. And it speaks to your background as a humorist, writing as a journalist for the Salem newspaper. But I just want to allude to one part of the book where you're talking about grace under fire and how to speak your truth in difficult situations, like, for instance, being groped on the subway. I think, and you say on the subway, yelling, "Sir, why did you grab me, sir? Are you going to grab my butt again? I wish you wouldn't, sir. It's violating and I don't care for it one bit." And you say that's extremely gracious and helpful to others' reaction. Never underestimate the power of a well-deserved public shaming.
Oh my goodness. Please don't. I mean, treating it, when someone is acting in bad faith, and they know they're acting in bad faith, but pretending like maybe they're not, and you're just exploring the situation. This also works in the workplace. Particularly when I was a young reporter, I would find there were some males in the newsroom who would kind of just loom over me and get really close to my face and just a little forward, a little too familiar. And so the strategy that I developed for dealing with that was I would give a surprisingly loud yell, which I won't replicate here because we're on the radio, but ah! And then once everyone in the newsroom has sort of popped their heads up, you look at them and say very deliberately, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't expect you were going to be that close to me."
Wow.
And it's just things like that, and just you're just stating a fact. You didn't expect they would be that close.
Just one of the many practical pearls of wisdom from your book. And boy, would I love to talk a lot longer on this very important subject of graciousness, but we have run out of time.
Oh.
And I want to make sure to tell our listeners about your website, which I'm just going to tell them right now, is kellywilliamsbrown.com. All one word, kellywilliamsbrown.com. And for those who tuned in late, this is your Pathways host, Paul O'Brien, author of Great Decisions, Perfect Timing, a book that shares the theme of pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. In a second, I'll tell you how you can rewind and replay this interview anytime you like, via the internet or as a free podcast. Just search for Pathways or Paul O'Brien, and you will find it on iTunes and other podcast servers. Today we have been visiting with Kelly Williams Brown, author of the book Gracious, a practical primer on charm, tact, and unsinkable strength, a hilarious and practical book for modern times. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to the Pathways program, which is broadcast and streamed worldwide via KBOO.FM Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. USA Pacific Time. Podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com, spelled D-I-V-I nation.com, as well as via iTunes and other podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Kelly Williams Brown and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways experience.